This is not your typical podcast.
Get ready for bold conversations with world changers.
Led by two unstoppable hosts with Down syndrome. The Audrey
And Jeremy Show!
On today's episode, we have two amazing people really making a difference in the Down syndrome community.
Christy and Eric Doran are here to talk about Alzheimer research and individuals with Down syndrome.
It's a topic that affects not just the Down syndrome community, but most families. You don't want to miss this. Hi everybody, we are back. This episode, we're going to be talking about the Alzheimer's research with these awesome researchers right here. So, let's get started. So, Jay, would you like to start off with the very first question of the day?
What is Alzheimer's?
Well, Alzheimer's disease is a neurodegenerative condition where parts of the brain slowly stop working, and over time there's less and less brain function. Usually the first signs are changes in memory. There can also be changes in attention and language skills, and then ultimately in everyday activities of living.
I'm curious, do either of you know someone who has Alzheimer's disease or had Alzheimer's?
Hey, I watched a show, but I don't think that's going to help.
No.
Can you think of anyone in your family? Alzheimer's disease is a condition that typically affects people when they're much older, people when they're 80s and 90s. So often it's our grandparents that will be the first people we recognize.
Well, my grandparents live in Oregon, so when they get super bored and they have like nothing to do, they will FaceTime me and my siblings and be like, do you remember the time when you were this young? And like send us photos and videos of us when we were young. That's what my grandparents do. So they're like, they still remember until when they're older and they don't remember us anymore.
Yeah, so it sounds like they're still doing well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Kind of. Yeah.
That's good to hear.
My question is, what is the link for Down syndrome?
The links with Down syndrome and Alzheimer's?
Yeah.
They relate, as you might expect, to the genetics of Down syndrome. I'm sure both of you know that Down syndrome is a genetic condition that's caused by an extra copy of a chromosome.
21st chromosome.
The 21st chromosome, that's right. So people with Down syndrome have 3 copies of that chromosome instead of the usual 2, right? Do you know where we get our chromosomes from? Why we have 1 from each pair?
Because of our parents each have 1, and when a child goes up to 2, they were all a mix of the parents.
That's exactly right. We inherit 1 of each pair from each of our parents. But sometimes people can have genetic changes that result in chromosomal imbalances where they can have extra or even too few. And in the case of Down syndrome, it's a result of an extra copy of chromosome 21. Now, our chromosomes contain genes that are the instructions for proteins, and proteins are the building blocks of our bodies, right? They code the information to help our bodies develop and function. And there's a particular gene on chromosome 21 that's specifically related to this risk of Alzheimer's disease. And that gene is called APP. The APP gene exists in 3 copies, and it codes for a protein called the amyloid precursor protein, or we can just call it amyloid from here on. And it's the overproduction of amyloid that is thought to be the strongest connection between Alzheimer's disease and people with Down syndrome. Now, amyloid is a protein that our brains need to function, but we need just the right amount. And that right amount typically comes from those 2 copies of the gene. When we have that extra third copy, our body makes too much of it. And it's the accumulation or overproduction of that amyloid in our brains that eventually leads to brain dysfunction, affecting our memory and our ability to learn new things, and eventually causing the condition known as Alzheimer's disease. So I hope that helps.
It does.
It does.
I have now a clear image of what that is.
So do I.
Good.
So do I. Why is it important for having this study with Alzheimer's?
Well, it's important because it affects all people with Down syndrome, as Eric just mentioned, because of the extra copy of chromosome 21. Everyone with Down syndrome is at increased risk for Alzheimer's disease. But we can also learn a lot from studying Alzheimer's disease in people with Down syndrome, because that information is useful for learning about Alzheimer's disease for the general population. So the sequence of events is the same. And so what we learn from Down syndrome research in Alzheimer's disease can apply for your family members, friends, neighbors, other people who, even if they don't have Down syndrome, may be at risk for Alzheimer's disease.
Well, so do I.
I am a part of the research also. The things that I like about it, that I have done my whole entire life, is taking a blood test to see probably the biomarkers of Alzheimer's, which is the one thing I have done my whole entire life, because I always had a needle in my arm all the time. And it's funny because I'm going to UCI later today with a needle in my arm again.
That's right.
So that will be fun. I can't wait to see what's going to happen next. But if I'm up to the age of being 25, I could be in a different research like him. And I get to take brain scans of my brain to see how my brain functions, which I would like to know if my brain works or not.
Well, that's right. So we have different studies, all on Down syndrome, for people of different ages. And as you were referring to, in one study, it requires a blood sample and cognitive testing, and we also interview a caregiver to understand the person's health and any other factors that may be going on in their life that affects how they do cognitively or in everyday types of activities. In another study called the Alzheimer Biomarker Consortium in Down syndrome, it's a lot of words. The short name is ABCDS. That is a much larger study that involves multiple centers, multiple universities across the country, and some in other countries. And that study includes a blood draw, but it also includes what we call neuroimaging. So there are PET scans and MRIs that take pictures of the brain that help us understand what's happening in the brain. And there's also cognitive tests that lets us know how that translates into everyday attention and language and memory skills.
Audrey, if I could add something, I was impressed with your liking the research participation to stuff you've always done at your regular doctor visits, right? You've done those things your whole life, and participants that we approach about the research will often ask us, what's it like? And that's one thing I like to tell them, right? It feels a lot like you're going to see your doctor, right? You're going to see a specialist that knows a lot about Down syndrome. The sorts of things you'll be engaged in will be giving a medical history, right? What medical conditions do you currently have? What conditions have you had in the past, right? You'll participate in a medical exam. You'll give a blood sample. And then you may participate in some of those other biomarker measures that Christy mentioned, right? The brain imaging and things like that. It's also a lot like you're going back to school because you're taking exams, right?
Yeah.
Those cognitive tests that we do that both of you are familiar with, I bet to you it feels a lot like you're back in school taking a test. right?
It kind of does.
So maybe more fun. It's not a reading test, right? Not a spelling test.
No, it's not.
No, it's really fun.
And you're not graded on it. Everybody passes, right?
Yeah.
So you brought up something that's really important, and that is the word biomarkers. And why that's important, why we collect blood or measure things using pictures of the brain, is because that tells us how much of a disease or how much of a certain biological process is happening or not happening. And just like you might get blood tests to understand your cholesterol level or how much your white blood cells are activated because you might have an infection, there are also biomarkers that are indicators for Alzheimer's disease. And so we can get a lot of information just from a small sample of blood about your overall health, including how much of Alzheimer's disease markers you have.
Why don't we unpack this Alzheimer's Biomarker Consortium for Down Syndrome, ABCDS study, right? So we know the A, Alzheimer's, B, biomarkers, as Dr. Hom just described, right? And then we all know Down syndrome, but what's consortium? What do you think that means?
That probably means a lot of things, but I feel like you need to explain that.
I'll explain it, and I want to touch on one aspect of that I think is important. So in this case, the consortium is a group of scientists, researchers, and doctors that share one common goal, right? That's to learn more about Alzheimer's disease in people with Down syndrome, to hopefully one day find a cure so it never happens, right? But also, importantly, part of the consortium is research participants like yourself, right? You're team members in this consortium, right? You're helping doctors and scientists, and we couldn't do this without you. So thank you for your volunteerism and participating in the studies that you're in, and considering even future studies with us. So thank you.
I love helping people. So if this card for helping other people, then sign me up because I am in.
It is definitely helping us understand the relationship between health conditions and lifestyle factors and how that can be protective or can increase risk for Alzheimer's in people with Down syndrome. But also what we learn in Down syndrome applies to the general population because the disease progresses in the same way. And so what we learn from Down syndrome research is also useful for understanding Alzheimer's disease for everybody else.
And Audrey, I'll touch on one thing that you just mentioned. You like helping people, right?
I do.
And when we think about what are some of the benefits, right, to participating in this research, what are some of the benefits to the individual participant? And like with all research, we can't promise any direct benefits for the individual that participates. But like you do, we recognize, right, that the benefits of our participation are likely going to help other people, right?
Yeah.
But this is a study that is called a longitudinal cohort study. Longitudinal means it just takes place over a long period of time. And the cohort just means it's people with Down syndrome. And we see people at routine intervals, hopefully for the rest of their lives. The ABCDS study that you mentioned has been ongoing for 10 years. We have participants who have been there for 10 years, so we have a decade of data on those individuals. Another study at UCI has been ongoing for 25 years, and we have participants who have been coming for annual assessments for all of those years. So what I foresee, some of the younger individuals in particular, such as yourselves, well, you may not directly benefit from your current participation, right?
Yeah.
As time goes on, we're going to learn more and more about Alzheimer's and Down syndrome, hopefully developing better treatments for the condition, better prevention strategies, and I said maybe one day even a cure. So with a study like this, it's quite possible that your contribution today will, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, when you're aging into your risk years for Alzheimer's disease, you'll potentially benefit from that. So I think that's an exciting aspect about these studies.
I was also part of this research too, and I just want to mention things I like. It was the memory I liked a lot, and the blood sample was really cool, and the MRI and the brain scan too. And when Audrey mentioned I want to help others, I also want to help others too, who has Alzheimer's. So I'm glad that I'm part of that study.
That's great. Can you tell the audience a little bit what it's like to be in the machine that does the brain pictures? The
Sure.
brain scans?
I've done this before. The MRI is really cool. Just lay there and just watch, just lay there and see the picture of your brain is working. And it's amazing your brain was not working. It's hard to see that. And seeing my own brain, it was interesting how seeing it, and I have more experiences with MRIs. I had one with my first one with my knee. I had a discoloration, and my second was my brain, and that was really cool to see. It was interesting because it's part of life. They just see what your brain is like. The age of 25, you are developing.
Mm-hmm.
So be healthy, and maybe one of these days you could participate in UCI research.
Exactly. So you get X-rays sometimes, like you said, of your knee, or if you have an accident and break something, they take pictures of your bone. So an MRI is taking lots and lots of pictures, not just one or two. If any of you have been to the dentist before and you have to take X-rays of your teeth, they take one picture at a time, moves things around, take another picture. But that's very slow. An MRI is fast, and it's constantly taking. And so it actually is making a movie because it can scan the whole brain from top to bottom or from one side to the other. Mm-hmm. So it's better than a traditional X-ray of just one photo at a time.
I do these monthly infusions, which also it would get a blood test and stuff. So I get blood for that. The best thing about doing that is that I'm now 21, so now I can change to a different area. So instead of shock, I don't go there anymore now. I go to Irvine. So I go to Irvine to take it. And the funniest thing is that since I'm talking to the two researchers from UCI, I will be going there today. So I probably am going to see you guys a lot.
So you mentioned your need to do some monthly infusions, and so that is something that we know that Down syndrome is associated with certain health conditions that aren't as prevalent in people without Down syndrome. And so that's what makes science and research so important, is most of the things that we know about diseases, such as the prevalence, who's the most affected, when during the lifespan symptoms start to appear, risk factors, treatment, all of that is usually done on research on people in the general population, people without Down syndrome. But having that extra copy of chromosome 21 makes things a little bit different. It can affect your body's ability to muster up an immune response. It can affect metabolism and other things that make people with Down syndrome different in terms of their health conditions and how that affects their overall well-being. So that's another reason why it's so important and why we're trying to encourage people with Down syndrome to participate in research. We're not only looking at Alzheimer's disease, but we're also looking at a lot of the co-occurring health conditions that are common in Down syndrome. Such as thyroid disorders, epilepsy, sleep apnea. And
yeah, we both have.
We both have it. We have both have.
Yeah, we both have CPAP.
Yeah, I wear it every single night.
That's
Okay.
fantastic, and that
Audrey?
will help decrease your risk.
Audrey, let me ask you something. Now that you, as you said, you're an adult now, right? So now you get your medical care not at the Children's Hospital, right? You go to UCI, it sounds like.
They actually kept me for the longest time at the KNP before I was 21.
Yeah.
I was like 20 and they were like, we still want to keep you because we don't want to let you go. And I'm like,
They already did that to
well,
me.
I'm old enough now, so I
I
can.
can understand that. Yeah, I know the Children's Hospital can see people even into early adulthood.
Yeah.
So even to age 21, as it sounds like they've
Yeah.
done with you. But now that you're an adult, let me ask you a question. Do you think there are healthcare guidelines specific for people who are adults with Down syndrome? You think there's such a thing?
I think so.
To be honest, yes, for
You-
me, because it's important for people to know the research you guys doing.
You are right.
Because
there
it's
are healthcare guidelines.
They're very helpful because they need to see the doctor and see what they want. And when I mentioned about the MRI and the PET scans, and also it's interesting because it's really a guideline is for them to participate in your research.
So you're right. Those healthcare guidelines do exist.
Yes.
And they've been recently revised. The Global Down Syndrome Foundation got together with a lot of doctors, specialists in Down syndrome, and revised the previous guidelines. And one of the changes they made to the guidelines relates to this issue of Alzheimer's disease. They had a strong recommendation in the new guideline. And that strong recommendation was that everybody with Down syndrome, by age 40, and beginning at age 40, they undergo annual screenings for Alzheimer's disease. And they recommended a specific tool that can help in that assessment. And to give you a bunch of more words, it's called the NTG-EDSD, which was developed by the National Task Group. The EDSD stands for Early Detection Screen for Dementia. And it's a tool that was specifically written for the assessment of dementia in people with Down syndrome, but as you mentioned, people with other forms of intellectual disability as well.
Yes.
And that tool is a tool that can be completed by caregivers and family members that know the individuals with Down syndrome well. And it's recommended, as I said, it be done every year from 40 onwards. Now, when we see Alzheimer's disease in people with Down syndrome, it's known as what's also called early onset or early age Alzheimer's. So Alzheimer's disease in people with Down syndrome happens at a much earlier age than it does in people without Down syndrome. You can see symptoms of Alzheimer's as early as age 40, which makes sense why the guidelines suggest screening beginning at age 40, right?
Yeah.
Now, not everyone with Down syndrome will go on to develop Alzheimer's disease. However, most individuals will. And with every year as they age, their risk to develop Alzheimer's increases. And that's true for Christy and I, too. With every year as we age, our risk goes up. But for us, our main risk years don't start till we're in our 70s and 80s, right? But for people with Down syndrome, it starts much younger. So that's why it's known as early onset Alzheimer's and why those healthcare guidelines recommend that early screening.
And so the reason why it's earlier in Down syndrome is, as we were talking about earlier, because of the extra chromosome 21, where the APP gene is located. So we know from biomarker studies that even in infants, there's already amyloid beta being produced. That's not true for the general population. So people with Down syndrome have had much longer, lifelong amyloid starting to accumulate in their brain. And amyloid is like the sticky, tacky stuff that if you have too much of it, it starts to clump up and forms something called plaques in between the brain cells. And that plaque interferes with other brain cells being able to communicate with each other. And over time, it also leads to the cells not functioning the way that they should be and it could lead to inflammation as well as neurodegeneration. All of that, once that starts that process, is what we call dementia. And what that means, people are losing skills and losing the things that they used to be able to do because the brain is no longer functioning the way it should.
Yeah. Now, I have a question. Can diet and exercise help?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So we know from research on the general population that lifestyle factors matter. In fact, in 2024, a landmark study and guidelines came out that said almost 40% of all dementia cases in the world could be eliminated by modifying 14 risk factors. And that includes things like sleep, diet, physical exercise, treating medical conditions like hearing loss, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. And we know in our studies, including from ABCDS, that leisure activity, employment, and physical activity also can slow down or prevent the disease from manifesting. So, for example, people who are engaged in more sedentary behavior, meaning they're wearing devices that we're monitoring their activity. Mm-hmm. So people who are less physically active have more symptoms of dementia in middle adulthood than people who are physically more active. And we've also shown in our studies that people who engage in moderate intensity physical activity have better language skills, attention skills, visual spatial skills, and adaptive skills. And finally, people who engage in more moderate physical activity also have less risk for things like sleep apnea and diabetes and other conditions that also increase risk for Alzheimer's disease. So by modifying and doing, being as healthy as possible and treating things like hearing loss or wearing your CPAP if you have sleep apnea, that can all reduce your risk and possibly delay the onset of any decline.
Let me ask the two of you,
Okay.
since your question was specifically be about diet.
Yes.
What type of diet do you think is healthiest for our brains?
Probably the one with a lot of protein.
I agree, because honestly, protein is it helps your brain to. If you like, I am like for me, I'm very active. You
Same.
mentioned, I am eating really good. Like, you need a lot of protein. Sometimes a lot of nutrients, like having a smoothie every morning.
Smoothies, so you've got vegetables and fruit maybe in your smoothies?
Yeah,
That's right.
that's what I did this morning.
What about things like fats,
Oh.
fried foods?
Yeah. I mean,
No, I
they're
don't.
not unhealthy food.
That's
Probably
right.
does not help with
I
your
agree.
brain.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But good high in protein food
Yeah.
would be like steak, salads,
And we get
and
protein
like
from other
grilled
sources too.
Yeah.
like grilled veggies or
Fish.
my
Nuts.
my
Yeah.
favorite in particular is fish. The diet that my doctor wanted me to go on is Mediterranean diet.
Yep.
So I get like a lot of fish, chicken, rice, veggies.
That's exactly the diet that's probably best for our bodies, including our brains. Right?
Yeah.
But since I want to lose a lot of weight,
So
I
do I.
would like to do a calorie count of all the foods I've been eating. So I will have a more effective to get a flat stomach, but still be physically active and be part of all the things I'm doing in my life before I forget all of it.
I'm going to do that.
Let me share one other thing with you.
Okay.
Measuring aspects of our diet is particularly challenging on the research side of things. It's difficult for
Yep.
people to do a daily diary of everything they ate, the type of food they ate and the quantity of food they ate.
Mm-hmm.
It's proved so difficult from past experience with researchers like us that part of ABCDS right now, we don't do it. We don't assess diet, but we'd like to. So we'd like to develop new ways that we can assess diet in individuals. And with artificial intelligence now, I'm hearing more and more about simple pictures we can take of our plates of food as they're served to us, plates of food with our leftovers, things that we didn't eat, and we could have sophisticated computer software that analyzes that food and helps us.
Yeah.
But
There's apps for that too. I
That's-
have a few apps that
that's
my
exactly
siblings and
what
my
I'm
family
thinking.
use
That's what I did
to
too.
track
So
what they're eating and stuff.
we would like to potentially one day partner with you, and you can help us brainstorm, right? Come up with ideas that would make it easy for us to track important aspects of diet and how they relate to brain health.
I would like to do
So
that.
that might
I would
be
love to do that too.
something we could circle back with and talk to you about. Let me ask you a question. If we think about Alzheimer's disease and all you've learned about it so far today, and we've talked a little bit about developing a cure or
Yeah.
even better treatments, what do you think the doctors and scientists are focusing on of all the things we talked about today?
I'm trying to think of this.
What?
Okay. I got a few things down on in my mind.
Go ahead.
ahead.
One, that part of Alzheimer's happens in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
So if your memory is fading away from you, it's not you, it's just your brain blocking the nerves, telling them that, sorry that we can't remember this, sorry we can't work with you,
Yep.
but if there's something blocking me, I can't fix that.
And Dr. Halm described it, and we've touched on it as well. What is blocking those nerve cells in the brain? There was a protein.
If it was protein, it will help your brain more and keep growing.
I think you're thinking about dietary proteins, but the protein I'm thinking of is amyloid.
Yeah.
Remember, it's the protein that's overproduced in people with Down syndrome. So the brain has too much of it.
Yeah.
And when it has too much of it, it eventually becomes toxic. And as you described it, it interferes with our brain functioning and leads to the symptoms of dementia. So a lot of the current treatment strategies are aimed at just that, the overproduction of amyloid. How do we control that? And there's clinical trials, so studies of new drugs that are going to be tested in people with Down syndrome that are attempting to do just that, control it at the gene level, right? The 3 copies of that APP gene. There's a new drug that's aiming to sort of turn one of those copies off and return the production to what is typical, as though someone just had 2 copies. And there's some new drugs that are available now that it can actually remove excess amyloid from living brain. And those drugs are about to be tested in people with Down syndrome, and they hold great promise in preventing Alzheimer's in people with Down syndrome.
Yeah.
So maybe one day at a future talk, you can bring one of the clinical trials experts in that area, and he can educate you and your audience about those upcoming trials, because they are exciting. They hold great promise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of my questions is, how young can participants be to be part of the research?
Well, that's a great question. We have different studies happening. The Alzheimer's research is in adults, and so 18, starting in 18, which is one of the studies that you're part of. But we also have studies that are following children and adolescents with Down syndrome, because we know that risk for Alzheimer's disease doesn't start in adulthood. It starts earlier in life with habits like diet, sleep, physical activity, as well as different kinds of health conditions that can contribute to it. So we have a new study that's about to start that will follow children and adolescents from birth all the way through adulthood.
Yep.
To like 0 months old to like
And
all the way
all-
into like adult,
yes.
like my grandpa, grandmother age.
And we even have studies that follow people afterwards. We have brain donors people with Down syndrome who
Not that you can do that.
donated their brain so that we can understand and see physically what has happened to their brain over time.
Yeah.
And that has yielded so much information that we would never have been able to get without those generous donations.
That's right. I want to make something clear to your audience as well, because we've talked a lot about research that's happening at UCI, right?
Yeah.
The 2 studies that are available for adults and this new study that's available for people, as you said, from birth, right? Age 0 on up. Those studies aren't only just happening at UCI. You have a wide audience, right? Those
Yeah.
studies are happening at sites all over the United States. And similarly, the work we're doing here in the United States to help people with Down syndrome in relationship to Alzheimer's is happening elsewhere in the world. So it's happening significantly in Europe. So there are a lot of research opportunities now for people with Down syndrome to help try to make a difference in this area.
And your audience may not be just local to California. So all these studies that we're talking about are multiple site or multi-center studies with at different hospitals and universities across the country. And so your audience can contact us or go to our website and find a place close to them and be part of a research study that is making an impact worldwide, not just in the United States.
We want to open our doors to anyone with Down syndrome that has their hand up, say, I want to help try to make a difference. And you guys don't know this, but for some of our studies, we have budget items that allow us to fly people in. So people that live quite a distance away from UCI can fly in. So we have people coming from Oregon, Washington, Texas. They fly in to participate. You two are local, so you just drive yourselves there.
So for me, let's talk about the showcase. Honestly, I was there helping out with Dr. Jamak's table.
I was there. I was in the show.
She was in the show, and it was really interesting seeing other people with need of doing what they love to do. And this study is important for people to know, hey, they could, when it's important for people with all intellectual disabilities to join and participate in this research. And how, my question for both of you is, I know you guys with DSALC does the showcase, and my question is, how many participants can do the showcase?
Well, that's a great question. Well, we're very excited about the Down Syndrome Showcase, which, as you mentioned, is a partnership between UCI and Down Syndrome Association of Orange County. We have stage performances, we have art exhibits, and we have people selling merchandise. We have people with Down syndrome who are entrepreneurs and are creative and have decided to make certain types of things that they sell. And it's not unlimited because we are limited in space and we're limited in how much time we have for people to perform on stage, but it's unlimited in the sense that there are people can combine together to do a group performance, so that allows us to have more people perform on stage. And we are also having video submissions, so people can also submit something that they're doing that they can't do at the theater that day. For example, water skiing or cooking. So there's lots of different ways for people to participate, and we're absolutely thrilled that you found it to be a great opportunity for you to see what other people with Down syndrome are able to do and to show your friends and families and neighbors. And that was one of the goals for this showcase. Was over the years, Eric and I have been doing research with people with Down syndrome for about 20 years. We've met a lot of people with really interesting hobbies and passions. People who like to do stand-up comedy, people who DJ, write poetry, write songs. So we thought, what a great way to let the whole community know about all these things that people with Down syndrome can do. And at the same time, for UCI scientists to be able to share about the research that they're doing so people with Down syndrome can learn directly about some of the work that's happening at UCI.
Wow.
I'll just add we'd like to have fun at our jobs.
Yeah.
And I hope when you participate in research, you've recognized that. There's a lot of serious stuff we need to do, right? A lot of serious data we need to collect. But interspersed between all that, we like to have fun. And as Christy mentioned, we're inspired, right, by the lives that our people with Down syndrome have.
Yeah.
I don't dance. I could never do stand-up comedy, right? I can't sing. I could never be a DJ. You're not going to see me get on that stage, I can assure you that. But so it's very inspiring to learn about your lives. We often come back and tell our coworkers about the amazing things you all are up to. And it's some of what motivates us to do our job, right? We want to keep you as amazing as possible for as long as possible. So,
Yeah. Yeah, so how can we find you guys?
well, I'll tell you, if you want to get a hold of me, because my job at UCI is primarily related to recruitment of new participants, community outreach, and education, you can call me directly at my office phone, which is 714-456-8443, or you can email me, and it's my first initial E for Eric, last name Doran, D-O-R-A-N, so it's edoran@uci.edu. Or we have a general email line, which is just Down Syndrome @uci.edu. We have a website as well, so Christy and I are both part of what's called the Center for Aging Research in Down Syndrome at UCI. And we have a website at cfar-ds.uci.edu. So you can find us there.
You can also find out about the next Down Syndrome Showcase on that C4DS website,
Awesome.
which
Nice.
will be coming up in September 21st.
I heard that me and Lumi might do one.
Yeah.
Might be in the showcase
Yep.
That would be
again.
great.
Yeah.
And are you going, oh, well, you're not going to,
Oh, so all the dancers and all of the comedians and stuff are already full. So my mom thought of a good idea, since me and Jimmy have a podcast. We might do like a podcast thing on stage.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're always looking for new and creative ways for people to show off what they like to do.
Yes.
And thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for having the time to be with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting us and asking us about the work that we do and how you can participate and contribute.
It's an honor to be here with both of you. Thank you
Of course.
for all
Of
you're
course.
doing to help us in our research and help get the word out about this issue. It's so important for people with Down syndrome, so thank you very much.
Of course. We're done.
We're done.